What if I told you that the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, it wouldn't be tanks or fighter jets that decide the outcome, but 3% of the population? Not soldiers, not politicians, ordinary people. This is the story of Taiwan's fragile defense, the lessons of insurgency, and why the 3% might be the most important idea you've never heard of. And before you think this doesn't apply to you, just wait till we talk about Australia. Hi, I'm Xander Lucas. In a former life, I was in the military and a police officer, and now I'm the author of FRONTLINE EARTH, The Last Alliance. I've seen the real cost of conflict. I've studied what it takes for nations to survive when their backs are against the wall. What you're about to hear isn't fear-mongering, it's a wake-up call. If you value real talk about war, strategy, and national readiness, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and follow me on Instagram at the XL Brief. Your support keeps this mission alive. Recently, my attention was drawn to the Sean Ryan Show, episode 209. It featured two men who understand conflict better than most, Erik Prince and Erik Bethel. For those unfamiliar, Erik Prince was the founder of the private military company Blackwater. He's a former US Navy SEAL and one of the most controversial yet influential figures in modern security operations. Erik Bethel, on the other hand, is a former US executive director at the World Bank and an expert on Chinese economic warfare, especially their use of finance and tech as tools of influence. Their discussion turned to Taiwan, a place most have heard of but don't truly understand the stakes. They weren't just talking about whether or not China might invade. They were asking, if war does break out in Taiwan, what happens to global stability, to the supply chains, to the world economy? The picture they painted was disturbing. What caught me off guard was just how vulnerable Taiwan might be. I'd always assumed they were heavily fortified, but the reality is more sobering. Taiwan is home to just over 23 million people. Its active duty military consists of around 169,000 full-time personnel, with a larger pool of reservists estimated to be around 1.6 million. But most of those have limited or outdated training. Their air force includes fewer than 300 combat-ready aircraft, and their navy is made up of just over 100 vessels of various types, including destroyers, corvettes, and a few submarines. Now contrast that with the Chinese war machine. The People's Republic of China commands the world's largest military by personnel and ship count, with over 2 million active duty troops, a rapidly modern air force bolstering more than 1,900 combat aircraft, and a navy that now surpasses the US in raw ship numbers. China has the capacity to overwhelm Taiwan with sheer volume and speed. Now yes, the United States has stepped up its support of supplying Taiwan with advanced F-16V fighter jets, Patriot missile systems, Harpoon anti-ship weapons, HIMARS rocket launchers, and the Javelin anti-tank system. But the question remains, can Taiwan truly resist an all-out invasion? That's where the conversation turned to something that Erik Prince called the 3%.
3% of Taiwanese society that is willing to defend status quo.
Let's take a quick history lesson. During the American Revolutionary War, the 13 colonies were under the thumb of the British Empire, the most powerful military force in the world at the time. The colonial men, mostly farmers and craftsmen, had no formal military training. They couldn't win in a conventional head-to-head war, so they adapted. They turned to guerrilla tactics, ambushes, sabotage, hit-and-run attacks. The British considered this uncivilized and dishonourable, but it was effective. Slowly, the tide turned. Now, with the colonial population, roughly 30% were loyal to the Crown. Another 40% were fence-sitters, people just trying to live their lives. The remaining 30% were pro-liberty, wanted to break free from British rule. But of that 30%, only about 10% actually picked up arms and fought. That's 3% of the total population. Those 3%, ordinary men with extraordinary courage, took on the world's greatest superpower, and they won. Now let's apply that idea to Taiwan. If just 3% of Taiwan's 23 million people were ready to resist, that's over 700,000 individuals who could form the backbone of a national insurgency. These wouldn't necessarily be soldiers in uniform. They could be police officers, firefighters, athletes, teachers, shopkeepers, anyone willing to defend their homeland. Would such a resistance have an impact? Well, history says yes. Vietnam resisted both the French and the Americans. Afghanistan bled out the Soviet Union and then later NATO. Insurgents in Iraq tied down the coalition forces for years. In each of these cases, large, well-equipped militaries were worn down by smaller, more determined insurgents. But Taiwan's challenge isn't just about courage, it's about preparation. Would these 700,000 people have the training, have the weapons, the coordination? Where would the gear come from? How would it be distributed? These are the hard questions no one wants to ask until it's too late. And now let's bring this closer to home. Do I believe Australia is under threat from direct invasion? No, I don't. But if a major global conflict erupts and nations begin drafting their citizens, could we rally the numbers? Australia's current population is around 26.8 million. 3% of that is roughly 800,000. Could we find that many willing, capable Australians to stand up if needed? I honestly don't know. I hope we never find out. I hope none of this ever happens. But we need to be realistic. We need to acknowledge that conflict doesn't wait for readiness. It arrives when it wants, and it tests the fabric of our nation. You don't need 100% of the population to defend a country. You need the 3%, if they're determined, equipped, and ready. The only question is, when that time comes, will we have them? If that gave you something to think about, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below, and follow me on Instagram at the XL Brief. Let me know. Do you think we've got the 3% here in Australia? Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos on your screen now for more deep dives into geopolitics, strategy, and the truth behind the headlines. This is Xander Lucas, and I'm signing off.